Mistakenly struck. The top U.S. commander in Afghanistan admits an airstrike on a hospital was a deadly mistake. Sanctity of life. Critics react to California's new law legalizing assisted suicide. Costly consequences. A florist fined for refusing to serve a same-sex wedding explains her position. And Synod fathers. We cover day 2 of a major meeting on the family in Rome. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, October 6th, 2015. Good evening from Washington. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. 3 investigations are underway tonight into the deadly bombing of an Afghan hospital. The top U.S. commander in that country now admits the weekend airstrike was a mistake. Wyatt Goolsby reports from the White House.
Brian, today the White House called the airstrike a profound tragedy, but they stopped short of issuing an apology. They say they're waiting until all the facts come out.
This is something that the United States takes quite seriously. In fact, the Department of Defense goes to greater lengths than any other military organization in the world to prevent civilian casualties.
White House spokesman Josh Earnest says the president understands the gravity of the situation in Afghanistan. These pictures show the aftermath of Saturday's U.S. bombing of a Doctors Without Borders hospital in Kunduz, which left at least 22 civilians dead and dozens injured. On Capitol Hill today, the top U.S. military commander in the country admitted the mistake.
A hospital was mistakenly struck. We would never intentionally target a protected medical facility.
General Campbell said Afghan forces asked the U.S. for the airstrike because they need help fighting the Taliban. Now the Department of Defense, NATO, and the Afghan forces are investigating. But the head of Doctors Without Borders wants a separate, independent probe.
We had nearly 200 patients and staff inside. No one can claim to not know what this building was doing and who it was treating, and the fact that we were providing impartial medical care in a war zone, as we do in many countries around the world.
General Campbell is also telling Congress he thinks the president should revise the current plan to draw down American troops by the end of next year. He says that conditions on the ground in Afghanistan have changed significantly since Obama approved that plan last year. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby at the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. South Carolina facing its 4th day of flooding with 15 now dead and little hope the crisis will let up anytime soon.
This is not over. Just because the rain stops does not mean that we are out of the woods.
South Carolina continues to grapple with the consequences of extreme weather plaguing the region. Hundreds of roads and bridges remain closed. 18 dams are being monitored throughout the state. 9 have already breached or failed since Saturday, forcing people to evacuate their homes.
Everything was underwater. The water level rose above the top of the dining room table.
People who have been able to return home are finding furniture and personal items scattered outside. Some apartments have been looted.
Their stuff is gone. It's just overwhelming.
At the end of the day, at least we are all still here and nobody, lost their life or anything like that.
A local cemetery flooded, separating headstones from the ground and unearthing caskets. And the problems are far from over.
We got a long way to go, but we'll get there. We got to do it together, but we still have a long way to go.
And President Obama visits Roseburg, Oregon on Friday. He'll meet with victims and family members of the deadly shooting at Umpqua Community College. He's calling for tighter regulations on guns. Democrats on the campaign trail are jumping on that bandwagon, as Mark Irons reports.
Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton talking tough on gun control.
How many people have to die before we actually act? It's time for us to say, wait a minute, we're better than this. Our country is better than this.
She called for tougher background checks, restrictions on military-style weapons, and accountability for gun manufacturers. Gun control has become an issue on the campaign trail in the wake of Thursday's mass shooting in Oregon. But while Clinton and other Democrats are pushing change, GOP contenders say not so fast. Conservatives like Republican presidential candidate Mike Huckabee say guns aren't the issue.
We have not so much a gun problem, we have a problem with sin and evil.
But survivors of previous mass shootings welcome the conversation.
I am so incredibly grateful that gun control and gun sense are being discussed on the platform that they are in our country, because they are such crucial issues.
Speakers echoed that call at a Monday night vigil honoring the victims in Oregon.
In those jurisdictions with stricter gun control laws, we have fewer gun-related deaths. Now, as a society, we must consider the connections between guns and violence.
Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Mark. Catholic leaders and advocates for people with disabilities speak out against California's new assisted suicide law. California is now the 5th state to adopt such a law. Catherine Szeltner reports tonight from D.C. City Hall, where similar legislation is being considered.
Brian, California's law allows terminally ill patients to take their own life using doctor-prescribed drugs. A D.C. council heard a similar bill this summer, and it's currently sitting in committee for further review. Ahead of the vote, opponents here in D.C. say this type of legislation doesn't help people, it hurts them.
Depression can be natural. People feel very isolated, they feel very dependent, and they're conditioned to think that dependence on others is not a good thing.
Sam Crane knows what it's like to be given a lifelong diagnosis. The 33-year-old is autistic. She's a graduate of Harvard Law School and a disability advocate herself. Crane believes California lawmakers got it wrong if they want to help people with special needs.
I know lots of people who've needed help feeding themselves and going to the bathroom, all their lives for decades, and they have meaningful, good lives. They just need that acceptance.
The legal measure shot to the spotlight when Brittany Maynard made her story public. The 29-year-old with terminal brain cancer moved to Oregon to end her life. California Governor Jerry Brown, a former Jesuit seminarian, says he met with a Catholic bishop and others before signing the assisted suicide bill yesterday. He writes, "I have considered the theological and religious perspectives that any deliberate shortening of one's life is sinful. In the end, I was left to reflect on what I would want in the face of my own death." California Catholics disagree with the governor's logic.
Don't get swayed by the emotional arguments of the moment. Actually look at what constitutes good law. Actually look at how we protect those who are vulnerable, most in need.
Los Angeles Archbishop Jose Gomez also condemns the California bill. The Archbishop took to Twitter today saying, "We can't respond to human pain by making it easier to kill oneself." About 20 other state legislators are considering similar laws, along with the council here in our nation's capital. Brian.
Catherine Szeltner at D.C. City Hall. Thank you, Catherine. We are Skyping with Dr. Kheriaty, a medical ethicist from the University of California, Irvine School of Medicine, joining us from Orange, California. From a doctor's perspective, what are the problems with this bill?
Well, one of the problems is highlighted by the reasons that Governor Brown gave for signing the bill. He said he considered both the arguments of the proponents and the opponents. Then he asked himself, would I want this option if I were facing a terminal illness? But of course, the governor has a responsibility not only to consider how this legislation is going to impact him personally or people like him, but how it's going to impact all Californians. He's a person who has access to the best care possible. He's a person who's well enfranchised. This bill is probably not going to harm the folks in Silicon Valley. It's going to harm the folks in Central Valley in California, those who are socially or economically marginalized, those who don't have access to good medical care at the end of life. Their range of options is actually going to be narrowed.
Are physicians feeling pressure to distribute these drugs, to prescribe them?
At this point, the law has not been enacted in California yet. So I think the answer is no. But as we proceed, I think we're going to see more and more pressure on the conscience rights of physicians, like we've seen in Canada and like we've seen now in Belgium and the Netherlands.
Does the law put into consideration at all the need for mental health care or palliative care?
Well, it doesn't really. It says physicians, if they're concerned, can refer patients for psychiatric evaluation, but there's no requirement in the law that says that they have to. And in fact, one of the problems with the law in Oregon and the new law in California is if we look at the experience in Oregon, only 5% of the individuals who got the deadly drugs were actually referred for psychiatric evaluation. And this in spite of the fact that we know that between 60 and 80% of these requests are associated with a potentially treatable clinical depression. So I think we're seeing all kinds of mental health issues falling through the cracks here.
Very troubling. Dr. Kheriaty, thank you for joining us from Orange, California.
Thank you.
And on day 2 of the Synod on the Family in Rome, the Holy Father says the meeting is not about a single issue, Eucharist for the divorced and remarried, which dominates news headlines. The Pope reminds bishops this year's Synod is really a continuation of last year's gathering. He clarifies that Catholic doctrine on marriage was not being called into question then. The cardinals, bishops, and priests are discussing ways the Church can better serve the family in today's society. The Synod moved from presentations into small groups today. So far, 6 Synod fathers have taken the floor to speak mostly in Italian and in English. Cardinal Thomas Collins of Toronto joining us from Rome. Your Eminence, what would you say is the tone of the gathering so far, especially the small groups today?
Well, the small group was very good. First of all, we just got to know one another, and tomorrow we'll really begin to work on our examination of the issues of the Synod.
What issues are standing out to you as universal? I know in America we tend to focus on the issues that we think are important, but this is really a worldwide gathering, is it not?
Well, it certainly is, and so far we've had a couple of days of speeches by the Synod Fathers, and with each one only 3 minutes, you get a fair number of speeches. They really covered a whole range of areas of things that are important in different parts of the world, so I don't think there's any one particular theme that has dominated the discussion so far.
In fact, the Holy Father wanted to be clear that there is not a single issue that's going to dominate that. What did you hear in the tone of his address to the Synod this morning?
Well, I think he simply made the very basic point that the Synod is very important. It needs to discuss the whole issue of marriage and the family, which is so fundamental in the life of all of us. And so it's important that not any one particular issue, be taken out of proportion, that the whole profound question of marriage and the family be treated in a very effective and a very deep way.
What do you hope is the result of this gathering of bishops and church leaders?
Well, I hope that the rich tradition of the Church and marriage and the family, which we've already seen some profound presentations of, for example in Familiaris Consortio, that this might be made more widely available to one and all, and we might come to a deeper understanding of it. The Church has a profound theology of the family and of marriage, and I think we need to appreciate it more fully.
Cardinal Thomas Collins, the Ordinary for Toronto, Canada, thank you for joining us from Rome. We appreciate it.
I'm very glad. Thank you.
Coming up, what are families contributing to the Synod of Bishops on the Family in Rome? We take a look. And a florist risks losing everything for taking a stand for marriage as the union of a man and a woman. Pope Francis today very much at the center of the Synod on the Family. He engaged the participants. You could also see him listening intently to the topics, to the discussions that were being held. Thanks for joining us on this Tuesday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and a Washington state florist who refused to provide flowers for a gay wedding now fights for her livelihood. She says she could lose everything, including her home, even her life savings. She sat down and talked with our Jason Calvi.
Baronelle Stutzman is a Christian who owns Arlene's Flowers in Richland, Washington. Her life was forever changed when longtime customer Robert Ingersoll walked in and asked her to provide flowers for his same-sex wedding.
I just put my hands on his and said, "I'm sorry, Rob, I can't do your wedding because of my relationship with Jesus Christ." And he said he understood.
Baronelle says she recommended 3 other florists. In this letter to Baronelle, the couple's attorney said they had spent thousands of dollars at the flower shop, admired Baronelle's talents, but her decision hurt them very deeply. The ACLU sued on their behalf, saying Baronelle broke Washington state's anti-discrimination law. Earlier this year, the group explained their position.
If a bakery chooses to open its doors to the public, it can't pick and choose who it will serve based on sexual orientation or any other characteristic of the customer.
A judge agreed and fined Baronelle $1,000.
It's not discrimination. I love Rob. It had nothing to do with Rob. It had to do with an event.
Baronelle is appealing to the Washington State Supreme Court, which hasn't yet decided whether to hear the case. Her lawyers say their client is being bullied.
If you don't comply, look what they've done. They can come in and bully you and silence you and say, we will take everything you own, your home, your land, your property, your savings.
If Baronelle loses, she'll have to pay the same-sex couple's legal fees. She's also stopped doing weddings altogether, but she says she has no ill will toward her former customer.
If Rob walked into my store today, I would hug him and catch up on his life and serve him another 10 years.
Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Jason. There are some very young participants in this year's Synod on the Family in Rome.
Siamo Massimo e Patrizia Paloni, famiglia itinerante del cammino neocatecumenale in missione in Olanda da...
Massimo and Patrizia Paloni are taking part in the Synod with their 3-month-old Davide. They say he's been nicknamed the Synod newborn and is believed to be the youngest person to attend a Vatican Synod. The couple has a total of 12 children. They are Catholic missionaries in Holland. Dr. Matthew Bunson with Catholic Distance University joining us tonight for some analysis on the opening days of the Synod. The Holy Father, very present today.
Yes.
What did he say starting the day off?
Well, you used the word engaged. I think that's exactly the word for the Holy Father today. Usually, we're used to the Holy Father coming in at the start of the Synod and then at the very end of the Synod. Francis unusually came today, and he delivered a message to the Synod Fathers that he reminded them of the continuity of last year's Synod with this one. He spoke again about the importance of the preservation of the doctrine of marriage, that nothing's going to be changing. And then he stressed that there are more issues than just Eucharist for the divorced and remarried on the docket. He wants them to be focused on the whole tapestry of issues facing the family.
So this was day 2. His opening homily, the opening speech by Cardinal Erdo, both very strong.
Picking up, laying the groundwork for a lot of the stuff that he said today. One of the things that is very clear here with Pope Francis, with Cardinal Erdo, who, for those who may not be familiar with him, Peter Erdo is the Archbishop of Budapest, but he's also the Relator General. In other words, he's the person who will deliver the final report to the Pope and has a big hand in shaping it. What the Holy Father is clearly trying to do with that homily, the different speeches, and Cardinal Erdo, is to reiterate the teachings of the Church squarely, bluntly, before we begin looking at the pastoral application of them. That's very important to do. What did he talk about? He talked about the indissolubility of marriage. He talked about the sanctity of marriage as a man and a woman. All of these things that the Synod is grappling with, but then he quoted 2 popes, and only 2 popes, John Paul II and Benedict XVI, talking about truth and charity, making the point that you have to have that balance, but the Church's obligation to teach in truth.
And in the middle of all this, we learned today that the Holy Father is going to make a trip to Mexico next year. What do you read into that?
Well, first, pencil in the fact that we're going to see Francis at the beautiful Basilica of Our Lady of Guadalupe. He's going to be talking to the 2nd largest Catholic country in the world. He's going to probably be talking about immigration and the whole problem of the narco wars.
Of course, he had talked about hoping to come from Mexico into the U.S. Instead, he came from Cuba into the U.S.
Yes.
You don't suppose he'll come back across the border when he's in Mexico?
With Francis, any gesture is possible, yeah.
Yeah, he always has a surprise for us. Dr. Bunson, we always appreciate the insight that you give us.
Great to be with you.
Thank you. An American scientist is awarded the Nobel Prize in Medicine, and the celebration not what you might expect. Dr. William Campbell's neighbor came by to wish him well and play a celebratory tune on the bagpipe. He's one of 3 winners. Campbell is a native of Ireland, but he became a U.S. citizen in 1962. He says this award took him by surprise.
I responded by saying, "Are you kidding?" And then I called this person back at the number they had left to ask how I could verify that this news was true. And this gentleman told me very kindly how I could verify it, which I did. So I began to believe it.
Dr. Campbell helped create a drug that has nearly wiped out 2 diseases spread by mosquitoes and flies. Those diseases blinded or disfigured millions in Africa, Latin America, and in Asia. Up next, with U.S. and Russian warplanes in the air over Syria, there's concern about possible accidents. And the work of a great Spanish artist on loan from the U.S. is featured in a London exhibit. Today is Tuesday, October 6th, the feast of St. Bruno, who founded the Carthusian order in 1084. He and his companions lived austere lives of poverty, prayer, and hard work. Thank you for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. NATO's Secretary General voices concern over Russia's presence in Syria.
Russia's deployment of significant forces in Syria is of great concern. Russian combat aircraft have violated Turkish airspace. This is unacceptable.
The skies over Syria are increasingly crowded and dangerous, with air forces from several countries flying missions now. Russia is not coordinating with the U.S. Russian warplanes have reportedly hit at least one U.S.-supported rebel group. Blaise Misztal is Director of National Security at the Bipartisan Policy Center. Is Russia going after ISIS, or is it defending Bashar Assad?
Well, I think it's always a mistake to think that Putin is doing anything other than doing what he needs to do. I think he's not committed necessarily to Assad. He is committed to maintaining Russia's power in the region and the bases it has in Syria. And he's also committed to trying to put a stick in the U.S.'s eye.
So what an interesting situation. We have U.S. and Russian warplanes flying over Syria, yet the U.S. and Russian strategy towards Syria is very different, isn't it?
It is. I think, first and foremost, Russia is happy to send its own troops, whereas the United States has tried to keep its boots off the ground and has tried to engage with local partners. Russia has no problem being there itself. It's sending its own planes, and it's sending its own volunteer army, it claims.
Doesn't Russia have some bases there that it's protecting?
It does. It has a major naval base in Tartarus, which is on the Mediterranean, which it's keen to protect, as well as an air base. And I think first and foremost, Russia wants to make sure that those aren't overrun.
Do you think there is any way that Russia and the United States can work together, even if Russia continues to support Assad?
Well, clearly what Putin wants is the image of President Obama calling him up and saying, Vladimir, can't we work this out together? Can't you help me out here? He wants to be seen as a power player. But I think this also raises the stakes, because if it looks like the Assad regime now has a strong military supporter, then the prospects for a negotiated solution become that much harder.
This is a dangerous game. Do you think there's any long-term strategy for, first of all, defeating ISIS, and then what becomes of Syria if and when that happens?
Well, we've seen the Obama administration in the past couple of days roll out a strengthened anti-ISIS strategy that involves arming some rebel groups directly, engaging in more airstrikes to try to retake the ISIS capital of Raqqa. So we're definitely trying to do more on that front, perhaps spurred by Putin. But what we haven't heard is really what happens once we defeat and degrade ISIS. And I think that's the question that everyone's looking to, and sort of the gap in our strategy that Putin is exploiting.
All right, from the Bipartisan Policy Center, Blaise Misztal, thanks for coming back and being with us tonight.
Pleasure to be with you, Brian.
The National Gallery in London celebrates the treasured works of Spanish artist Francisco Goya. Among the 60 works on display, this Goya masterpiece of the Duchess of Alba highlights this exhibit. The painting is making its first appearance in the UK. It's on loan from the US, by the way. Recently, some scholars cast doubts over whether Goya actually painted the portrait.
It's been said that stylistically the picture is quite different from other paintings by Goya, and although she's painted with great flair, in particular the black lace mantilla, when you look close it lacks the subtlety and the transparencies of the textures that you see in authentic Goyas, and this has been one of the key questions regarding its attribution.
The portraits on display are of members of the royal Spanish court, their families and clergy. Goya worked under 4 monarchies. His life spanned 80 years, born before Mozart and surviving Napoleon. Thanks for watching tonight. Until tomorrow, we encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter. You can watch again on EWTN's YouTube page. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night. God bless.